Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. We're live. We're recording. Where do we start?
It's happening.
It's happening. Okay, so we want to have this really deep conversation, right, about emotional eating. And Matty, you and I both specialize in this area and helping women with emotional eating and overcoming emotional eating. And this is something that we've wanted to talk about for years and we never have. So we're doing it, and we're doing it like raw and uncut, and we have no idea what's going to happen here.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about it. And I think as we spend a lot of time together, off recording podcasts, but when, my thing was evolving, I guess my services and products were evolving. I kept, as we talked about, kept being like, oh no, Dani's going to think I'm coming into her space and trying to steal her business and her clients. And I felt, because it was always a part of what I did, it's just the way that I articulated it to the masses, to the listeners, is the thing that changed. And so I think maybe that probably drove, I don't want to talk to Dani in case she says, I don't like you anymore.
Oh, okay. So for a little backstory for everybody listening who doesn't know this, Matty and I, how long have we known each other now? Like 4 years?
4 or 5 years, yeah.
4 or so years. We met on a summit eons ago, and we have since just hit it off as awesome friends. And even though we've never met in person, which totally blows my mind, we will. We have plans, everybody. We have plans. Stay tuned for some sort of in-person photo within the year. Hold us to that. 12 months. Look, we've got a goal.
Yes.
But yeah, we've known each other and become like really close friends. We've supported each other through some like really shit, some big stuff emotionally and with our families and just all sorts of stuff. And now we have the pleasure of masterminding together. So for, I don't know, has it been a year yet? Not quite. We have a couple others in the group, and we meet every week actually and co-work together. And once a month we do a deep dive mastermind together with a couple others. And it's been really fun. And I definitely consider you one of my close friends. And it just boggles my mind that we've never had this conversation. And yeah, we do. Like, we talk often about how your program has some overlap and is very similar to my program and how I work with my clients, but we've never actually like hashed it out. So I'm like really curious. And we thought, why don't we just record this and share this with everybody who wants to listen too? So I'm really curious, like your approach to emotional eating and how you work with clients, how that all unfolds. So I don't know where we want to start, maybe like starting with the basics and like, what is emotional eating to you? Right. And maybe like, why are we emotional eaters? And then I'll share my bits and we'll go back and forth.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right. So what is emotional eating to me? So to me, emotional eating is eating for any reason that is not nutritional requirement. If we were to put a textbook definition on it, it would look something like that, which then begs the question that a lot of people are unaware of, which is, at what point am I eating for emotions and not nutritional requirement? Because a lot of people don't have the awareness that they're emotional eaters. I've had a lot of people come through my program for the nutritional aspect and been like, I never would have called myself an emotional eater until I did your program. And so, in a nutshell, I would just say that, it's for any reason that's not nutritional, biological requirement of operating your body, putting food in would, come under some kind of other motivating factor that drives you to eat, which could be social, which is fundamentally emotion. You might feel any type of emotion, stress, obligation, shame, not involving yourself in Friday night drinks because your friends are giving you shit for that.
FOMO's an emotion.
FOMO's huge. FOMO's huge with like sugar and walking into the supermarket and thinking, I'll do it today, but I won't do it tomorrow. But the problem is it's always today. It's never tomorrow. So that's the way I view it. And then I guess on my own journey of discovery of, the human body and the mind and the awareness of reality and ourselves and metacognition and, the art of thinking, we just spend so much time on autopilot. And I think we're just so, in the modern world where stress is, and we were just hanging out with Karen Martell as well, talking about, the stress of daily life in this era. And it's just so much that to even get alone by yourself to check in and know how to check in, know how to identify your body, what you're feeling, your emotions, be able to label those emotions is almost a forgotten art, which is why you and I have relevance.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So, what about you?
Yeah, no, really well said. Like I agree with everything you said. You know, how I would word it is really like, and I find this really exciting. I'm so excited for our conversation, obviously, because you coming at this with more science and research and more like of that, you know, all of your amazing background. And I feel like my journey through this as an emotional eater myself, I know we both are. I know we both talk about that, like, oh crap, I emotionally ate today, right? We still do it, guys. Newsflash. I know Matty does. I know Matty does. And I definitely
100%.
Definitely do. So yeah, it's, you know, for me, my journey to like understanding this has really come maybe from more of a feminine perspective and a more like experiential, maybe even like spiritual aspect, as well as I've been on my own like path of inner healing and growth and spiritual curiosity. And so like, you know, I'm coming at it from that sort of angle as a woman as well, which is, so it's kind of cool. I just, you know, reiterating again how excited I am to have this conversation. So, you know, as I do, so yeah, emotional eating for me, like I would describe it exactly what you said, but I would almost say it like, you know, it's the turning to food and eating for food for any emotional response, right? Whether it's joy or sadness or depression, right? Like there's an emotional response in the body, and we're using food as a coping mechanism or as something to heighten that sense of whatever celebration. Or so there's like this deep emotional connection to why we're eating. I think that's the whole thing. It's like, why am I eating? Is it because my body needs fuel, or is it for like, is it something else that's deeper going on, right? That like I'm uncomfortable in my body and I don't know how to feel, and I'm going to stuff it down with donuts and hopefully make myself feel better. Right. So yeah, I think that's kind of like, that's just to add on to what you said in that. And
I think the lines get really blurred for people too, because of the modern diet and lifestyle. So often you physically feel hungry. You do, like, and it's because we've got these deeply entrenched habits. And I think, you know, one of the biggest factors, and I'd be super curious how you take people basically from 0 to 1, from like interpreting their body as like, I'm hungry at this time at 7 a.m. in the morning, when it's just a hardwired response, hormonal response that we can change quite easily. Or, you know, the types of foods that they eat lead to hunger. And so, how do you take people from no awareness of emotions and that they're being driven by emotions to being like, oh, so I'm not really hungry? Because that's kind of confusing, right? It's like, I do feel hungry, but am I?
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. That's such a good question, because I do see that so much with all of my clients. There's this I'm going to say the word pandemic. There's like an epidemic. We'll say epidemic. Sorry, wrong word.
That word has totally lost its value.
It's totally lost all meaning. It's like, it really comes down to the truth that the society that we grew up in, I know you're in Australia, I'm in Canada, like we're all in the like, you know, first world problems, right? So what we've been born into and grown up in is this world where we have been taught to disconnect from our emotional body. So we are no longer connected with our physical, like, let alone our physical body, but there is this actual like very energetic network that is underlying in our body. And that's what emotions are. They're just, I love that saying, right? Emotions are energy in motion. Yeah. So we've been taught to disconnect from that for various reasons that we can get into later. But that, you know, that piece, that's how I approach it, is really like, we have to first start reconnecting with our body and reconnecting with and getting curious about those different sensations, because you're right. It can feel like all hunger is just real hunger, and it's not. It's a very different cue in the body when you start to become aware of it. Like, no, my stomach isn't hungry, but my mind is hungry. Okay, that's emotional, right? There's something fucked up going on there. So we need to start just practicing getting back into understanding the nuances of those signals in the body, right? Like, am I actually hungry, or is there something else going on? And how I really encourage my clients to do that, like those who are like total ground zero, is really just starting to build in the habit of pausing before they eat anything. So like just taking a pause and asking yourself, what's coming up in the body, not even what I'm feeling, because most women, actually all my clients, are so blocked from feeling anything that question of what am I feeling right now brings up nothing, because you're not feeling anything. A lot of my clients, I'm curious if you have that too, Matty, are really just like flatlined, like, you know, not feeling too much joy, not feeling too much sadness, kind of just blah all day long. And that's very normal. If anybody here is like, oh, that's me. It's very normal. This is like usually a trauma response or some sort of like learned response to just like be mundane all day and not get too connected with your emotions. So very normal. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. And it just really takes that curiosity and that daily practice of like tuning in. So I would use more language like what's coming up in my body or what sensations am I feeling in my body, and helping people really start at ground level beyond like before even trying to label an emotion. Cause I don't think labeling an emotion matters. I don't think it matters because it's your lived experience of like that stress being tightness in the jaw and heaviness in the shoulders or like a knot in your stomach. Those are the signals that will help you essentially like somatically connect with what's really going on. So you can start to tell, is this real hunger or is it just like stress because I'm like this, right? And my jaw is tense and stuff. So we have to start getting curious, like before you're eating, like what's coming up in your body, right? And just start keeping track of that, start journaling it, keeping track of it, because we'll forget what happened yesterday. So we need to write it down, and then you'll start noticing patterns, right? Like, oh, I am eating, like, and just bringing that awareness to checking in before you eat or drink anything will be enough to start building that deep understanding of like what's really going on. And over even a couple of days, definitely over a couple of weeks, you'll start noticing, oh, I'm not hungry. There's something else going on here.
Yeah.
What do you do? Is any of that stuff that you do too? Or how do you help your clients get from like 0 to 1?
Pretty similar actually. Like, diary. So in the beginning, we don't really change anything.
Diary.
Yeah, well, we actually call it like the transformation diary.
Oh, I had a diary when I was a kid.
And that component at the back is the transformation tracker. So the idea is that we don't count calories, we don't weigh food or anything like that, but we do write down the food we eat, like just what's on the plate, approximately, not every ingredient, the emotion and the location. And so the idea of that first couple of weeks of collecting that data is, because I say don't change anything, even though everybody's like, I'm on a health program, I feel this urge to change everything because that's what I've done on every other diet. It's really just collecting data so that people can bring themselves into their own awareness.
Yeah.
And they're like, and people start even losing weight in that phase because they're like, whoa, I didn't know I was doing this. And they just start self-correcting, which is so much more empowering than me telling anybody what to do. Right. Yeah. So it's really good that we go through that phase. But I do the same thing, have the same issue with people saying, I don't know what I'm feeling. And, I sort of focus on like you, women, mothers that have been surviving as mum, wife, career, entrepreneur, all the things that they're kind of flatlining to. They're numb because that's how they've had to operate as a mother to survive, to provide for everyone else. And they're in this space of just like, this gets me through every single day, so I'll stay here. And so I actually think progressing toward, and this might be a little point of difference for us, is that based on my understanding of therapy research and psychology research, is that the people that are more likely to benefit from a mindset work or deep work is often based on their ability to intellectualize and then verbalize the stage of the journey that they're at. And what that looks like is being able to label emotions. And there's tools like emotion wheels and emotion spectrums that have got all the different ways that can explain how you feel. But if you only have good and bad, you could actually be making significant progress from really, really bad all the way to it just feels uncomfortable today. Both of those kind of fit in the bad category, but they're enormously different in experience. And then there's irritable and frustrated. And so therapy research shows that the more words that you're able to pull out and identify where on the journey you are, the more likely you are to progress and succeed with healing that. So I think it's important, and I totally agree with the energy thing as well. In the beginning, if you can't label it, spending time with yourself, feeling in the body where you feel the feelings. Sometimes you might feel anger in your forehead or anxiety in your stomach, starting there. And I've got some people too that literally just do smiley faces in the emotion box. It's like, I feel like this.
Yeah.
All of that works. But I think also the art of becoming literate in yourself and being like, this is pretty much exactly what it is, really allows successful progress. It allows a greater level of self-awareness. And also, if you can become that literate in yourself, your relationships around you are going to improve too, because the way that you show up and communicate, because one of the downfalls of intimate relationships is communication. It's not being able to say exactly what's going on. And in my life, and I know many of my friends too, the amount of arguments that I had with "you should just know what to do"
Right.
it's an awful way to operate in a relationship. And that all comes down to that individual's inability to say, this is exactly what's going on for me, and here's the exact solution. And it's not always going to be perfect, obviously, but coming back to being able to verbalize and articulate where you are on the journey, I think has not just benefit to an emotional eating journey and therapy, but I think it's tenfold. It improves your relationships with your friends, with your family members. You attract other people in that are able to communicate on that level. And it's all just part of the growth. So yeah, that's the way I kind of come at it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, for sure. That makes so much sense. And I'm definitely not saying, right, that I don't think anybody should label emotions. I think that can definitely be helpful. The reason I said what I said too around that was because like what I see in my practice in a big way is that we've become so disconnected from ourselves and our bodies that when we, I've seen this with myself and my clients, when we get so obsessed, right? This is, I guess, why I said that, right? To not become obsessed over needing to have a label. I've seen so many people try to I can't quite label it, or I can't figure it out. And then that just makes it worse. Right. And we're starting to then judge ourselves for not being able to label an emotion or and staying in our head a lot, right? This is really where I'm passionate about this work, because an emotion is, yes, there's a thought that comes after it, of what it is and being able to articulate it and label it, but it's an in the body experience. So we need to start there and not necessarily spend all of our energy, because our desire in the society we grew up in is to just think our way through everything. Think our way through problems, think our way through a solution, everything. And that's not where the answers lie. I'm such an intuitive person, and connecting with our inner wisdom and our higher self and the whispers from within. And that's the more you connect with actual sensations in your body. So definitely labeling emotions can be helpful, very helpful, right? Yeah. But most people are not at that stage. And most people will use that as a way to just get really overwhelmed, more in their head than they were before, and continue to just try to think their way through what am I feeling versus feeling their way through what they're feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
So there's a balance, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it's probably an important little disclaimer to share with anyone listening is that you and I are the practitioners that work with many different people and personalities. And so right now we're talking, as two colleagues through our methodology. And so it's definitely not about feeling judged if you can't label it, if you can't find it. Everyone's on a different spot of their journey. And, even though the way I think about it as a practitioner is we're at this stage of the journey, I would never verbalize it like that to someone in front of me that needed help, right? Yeah. It wouldn't be like, if you can't say it's, frustrated or irritable, we're not making progress. It's not like that. It's just more like introducing people to there's other ways to do it. And I do the same thing. As soon as you can't label it, back into the body, feelings, energy, where do you feel it? How can I talk a lot about downloading energy from the body, because I really think that when we've got tension in the body, or we've had a fight, or we've been triggered or something, that if just talking about it doesn't work, getting it out of the body with a pen, or you could scream into a pillow, but whatever it is, physically moving something out of your body into physical reality. And I personally enjoy journaling, you've also got to, you don't just do it, you've got to attach the idea in the visualization of downloading in your head. So I literally imagine, as I'm looking at the page writing for myself, and I encourage everybody to do this, imagine this red stuff, this energy coming from wherever it is in my body out of my arm through the pen onto the paper. And it really works to move that. And so even I in my personal life do the same thing. If it's just noise in my mind, I'm just get it out of the body, and then once it's out, I don't even need to label it at that point. It's gone. Right. So that's another strategy, is that, you can come back to, just those feelings and where it's at.
I love that. Yeah, I love that one. That's so good. I had this picture of black smoke, because I've done a lot of visualizations of that before, getting the black smoke out, right? But I just learned about rage writing a while ago, and that was a super helpful tool for me a few months ago. Yeah, that's a good one. I was like, ooh.
Well, in many cases for me, that's kind of what's going on.
Yeah, that's really, it sounds like that's what's happening. But are you like ripping it and then burning it? Like I went all out. Like it was hardcore. It was so great.
I'm definitely not. Well, my thought is that my journal that and I share this with clients too, is that like, if you're putting your deepest stuff in here, you want to go and buy a nice journal.
Oh,
like,
for sure.
Yeah, like I love the feel of mine. I spent a bit of money on mine, and like, it's got my initials on it embossed. It's like it's sacred, right? You're pouring the deepest parts of your soul into this that you hope probably nobody ever reads, because it's totally out of context and they might think you're a raging monster.
Don't read. I would love to read your diary. Oh my God. I tell my clients at the start of every program, like, go invest in a beautiful journal. Like you want this to be something that you like energetically want to have with you all the time. Right. Like, yeah, I love that.
No, I totally feel the same. So yeah, no, I think, I feel like we're in the same ballpark for sure.
Yeah, totally. So I love this question because like I kind of like I want to talk about this, so I'm going to ask it to you. Why do you think we are emotional eaters? Like, where do you think? Like, I'm such a big fan of like root cause awareness, right? Like, why do you think this is a thing? Like, why? Like, my opinion is like 80-90% of humans are. Well, I think we all actually know 100% of humans are emotional eaters. Like we all have some sort of emotional connection to food and some reaction. So like, why do you think that is? Where does that come from?
I think that's a multi-layered answer, because just as you corrected and went to 100%, it made me think of like tribes, right? Tribes have like food culture built into them, even though 99% of the year they hunt and do all of the things that they used to do back in the day just for survival. They do have festivities and rituals where they, go and kill a bunch of animals and feast. And that at some point that becomes an emotional, social gathering connection type thing, which we still do today, obviously. We catch up over food. We have big events that are based around food. But I guess, getting to like, why, I think the reality is we do have first world problems, and that is the fact that food is super available, and when we're stressed, traumatized, hurt, broken, any of the uncomfortable, aka negative emotional experiences, the body and your brain and your hormones are seeking balance. And to seek that balance, we've got cortisol and adrenaline maybe that are high in response to any uncomfortable emotion, because it's a stress on the body. And the counter to that would be your serotonin and your dopamine, which is your happy hormones. And so the brain is fantastic in the sense that we've solved millions and millions of problems over millions of years to get to this amazing first world that we've got in 2022. But the brain also doesn't have a bias as to the problems that it solves. It just goes, what is the fastest way to increase dopamine and lower cortisol? The fastest way to do that is sugar. And then it automates that process. And so going back to the emotions, it's really important for people to realize that once you identify yourself as an emotional eater, that's a symptom. Once we identify the emotion, that emotion is still a symptom.
Yeah.
It's still not the cause. It's still not the cause. And so I have an exercise called the Y times 5, which is just the title. Sometimes it's Y times 3. Sometimes it's Y times 27. But it's basically just the perpetual peeling of the onion to find the core thing. And the core thing could be a childhood trauma, could be having kids and just being in survival mode for the last 10 years. It could be literally you've just been programmed for 40 years by a $1 billion industry that's designed to program you in a certain way. So I think the natural state of the brain is to find the fastest way to a solution possible. And when we have something that's not just emotionally addictive, but actually cellularly and biologically addictive, the brain is like, it's a low barrier to entry solution to the problem in the short term. We obviously know it's not in the long term. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't need to exist. Yeah. But I think that's why, accompanied with, there's a social aspect to it, there's a cultural aspect to it, which I think both of those are actually okay because it connects us as a community. It's all of the additional snacking and self-punishment and surviving outside of that emotional eating that is the unhelpful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you really brought up something interesting there too, because that could be a good like side tangent, around like, it's not that food shouldn't bring you joy or food shouldn't be enjoyable, or like, I think it's more like, how we're using it on the front end, and like, am I overeating every day because
Yeah.
I'm using it for an emotional crutch, right? Versus like, I'm at a wedding and I'm enjoying the food, and like it's Christmas dinner and we're like enjoying food together and it's really enjoyable. Like food should be an enjoyable experience. I think we have so much like, oh my God, we have so much food fear and shame that it's like sitting down to have a meal, or like eating a piece of bread is like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person, as we're like putting it in our mouth. And like, how is that helping? Right? Like, it's not. Just eat the bread, enjoy it. Like, that's my opinion. Anyway,
Totally. And I really believe in the idea that how you do anything is how you do everything. And so if somebody's beating themselves up for bread, they're beating themselves up for a lot of other things that have got nothing to do with food, right?
I have personal experience with that.
Yeah. Same. I was, absolutely savage and horrible to myself, which for me, when I peeled my own onion, it was back to childhood trauma and survival and comforting myself and soothing myself, and I had to work through all of those issues myself. And so, which is how I came to be able to be aware of this stuff, because I didn't want to live the life of my grandparents and my parents and my uncles and the men that I was surrounded by growing up. I was like, I want a better life. Everyone seems miserable.
Yeah, I think we have very similar stories in that. I know we've had lots of conversations about our families and our like upbringing and lineage and our moms. Sorry, Mom, if you're listening, I love you. But yeah, like that is really where it starts, right? Like it's so deep and entrenched. And I'm assuming everybody who's wanting to listen to this, right? Like, that there's obviously, a way out, and there's also a reason that we want to not be emotional eating, right? Like it's obviously not helping, especially when we're not emotional eating on cucumbers all day long and steak, right? Like we're emotional eating on chips and candy and crap and all those things.
Well, and you can totally overeat healthy food. You can totally emotionally eat, things that you think or feel are not as bad as sugar. Like there's a big conversation in my program just last night about artificial sweeteners. And I said, before we talk about that, you need to make sure that two things are not happening, that you're just emotionally eating things that you believe are healthier. And two, that artificial sweeteners often drive overeating because they don't actually give you the sugar the brain is expecting. So like it can kind of, your plan to make a better move can actually kind of fold back in on itself.
Oh my God, side tangent. But Sorry, guys. Side tangent. But we'll have to do another one on artificial sweeteners. I do not agree.
We know you and I could basically talk forever.
Yeah, I know. Everybody prepare for a 3-hour-long podcast. We are now.
Joe Rogan, watch out.
Hey, do you think anybody would stay around for 3 hours? I'm curious. Let us know.
Yeah, definitely let us know.
Yeah. Okay. So my view on this, and I'm like really passionately believe in this because I've seen this in my own life, and I see this now, like really, I'm getting very curious. I'm learning a lot about trauma. My husband's actually doing some somatic trauma training right now. And we're just really understanding like how these attachments and patterns start for all of us in the first 7 years of life. And when it comes to emotions, like what I've seen, I always kind of share this in like a twofold way when people ask me like, why do we emotionally eat? Like, where's this actually coming from? Number one, like we all, I can say that if you have a computer or a phone and you're listening to this episode, right? Like you're probably in this category. Is we've been raised in a society where literally every single emotion on the emotional wheel has some sort of link to food. And usually sugar, right? Like joy, sadness, anger, frustration, like all of it is like immediately. So right when we're born, we start having these connections. We see it in advertising. We see it in the movies when the girl breaks up with her boyfriend and she's eating a type of ice cream. Like we see it everywhere. And the second piece that I think is at the core for like a bigger piece, and this is where I really focus my work with my clients, is that we have never been taught. There's a rare breed of human being that has been taught this. I've never met one, but I'm sure they're out there like the unicorn. But we have not been taught how to actually feel and be okay in an uncomfortable emotion.
Yes.
So this is huge because what is going on right now is, aside from eating sugar to feel joy or celebrate things, I mean, that's obviously a different emotional piece, but where I feel most people are spending their time is using sugar and food to escape the difficult emotions. So why are we escaping the difficult emotions? Because they feel unsafe in our body. Why? Because we've never been taught that they're okay to feel. So right from the first time you fall down as a kid and scrape your knee and start crying, and your mom is like, oh, stop crying, let's go get ice cream, you immediately learn it's not okay to cry. It's not safe to feel emotional in my household. And I need to get out of it as soon as possible. Mom's telling me to stop crying. I guess it's not safe to cry. So I need to go and get a dopamine hit or distract myself or whatever that was. Let's watch Netflix or get ice cream or whatever it is, because the parent has been so uncomfortable with that emotion. So this is a huge problem, because now we're adults not having any resources or tools to actually support ourselves through an emotion, right? Most kids are just sent to their room by themselves when they're angry or having a temper tantrum, or they're being yelled at. Love is being taken away. We're being traumatized more and more, emotionally traumatized, which when you're in that like below age 10, like that's a real trauma, because you are dependent on your parents for survival. And if they don't emotionally hold space for you and support you in like letting you cry or letting you be angry and teaching you how to actually deal with that in a healthy way. You got anger? Great. Let's go outside and like throw rocks in the lake, or let's have a pillow fight, or let's let's scream together, right? Like, let's actually like do things that are healthy instead of hitting your sister, or like my husband would bite his sisters. That's a whole nother, like another way of dealing with anger. But we've never been given the tools. So we're now humans. Well, we're children in adult bodies. Now, like whenever a difficult emotion comes up, which it does every day, that's part of our current reality as humans. There's a difficult emotion every single day that feels uncomfortable in the body. Our subconscious patterning goes, oh my God, get out of it as quick as possible. This isn't safe. You're not safe. This isn't safe. Get out of it. And we use this terminology, and I'm curious about you because you corrected yourself with this. So I'm curious if you do this as well. Like, I do my best to never use the word negative emotion, because one of the beliefs that we have is that these difficult emotions aren't meant to be felt. And there's something wrong with us if we feel depressed, or if we have anxiety, or if we're angry, right? There's like this, they're negative, so we should never feel them. There's almost this collective belief, like we shouldn't feel these heavy emotions. And then we start guilting and shaming ourselves for feeling like shit. And it just creates this whole like emotional roller coaster that then we're like, I can't deal with this. I'm just going to binge on food. Like, forget it. Right. And it's become so subconscious now because we just do not have these tools to sit with our emotions. So that's the first thing I do stage one with my clients is like, we're going to create space for you to actually like sit. If you're sad, like you don't have to sit, you can like walk if you want, but like, you know, like be with yourself and practice knowing how to support yourself. And actually the more we allow ourselves to feel an emotion, because that's the thing, we have never allowed ourselves to feel an emotion. We've been escaping our whole life.
Yeah.
So we need to first start feeling again. And this is the hardest part because feeling sucks. Like it doesn't suck. It's actually, I love it now when an emotion comes up. I'm like, yes, here come the tears. Like I know, because I know that it's so healing for me and that I'm releasing it and not holding it in. So, but in the beginning, it's really uncomfortable because you've never felt rage, or you've never felt like allowed yourself to feel depressed or anxious, because we've never been taught that it's important, and it's an important part of human health and like on so many levels. Right. So that's kind of where I see it coming from in a really big way, is like these patterning that we've never been taught. Number one, that we should be feeling heavy emotions. It's part of the human experience. Right? You can't feel joy without total sadness, right? And grief and whatever. Yeah. So we have to embrace both sides and find a way to do that so we can start feeling like safe in the body and repatterning our beliefs about that. And obviously there's a lot of work to do around that, but that's a big part.
Yeah, totally. I really like the idea of using the words heavy emotions and uncomfortable emotions. At the same time though, I think like a lot of people, they need clarity in their journey, and it's okay to call a spade, which is like, because you get on the other side of the heavy emotion, and you look back and you're like, that was shit. That felt terrible. Like, you know, and so it's like, in some ways, I think it is okay to be like, yeah, that was a negative experience. That affected me in a negative way. The tool set that I've now acquired allows me to accept that as true, and for it to be okay, and then transition into a place where I feel contentment or stability again. I won't say positive, because we oscillate between negative and positive, right?
Every day.
I think everybody's goal in life is really the middle, the content, okay, stable, calm type thing. So I think, I like all of them. It's just like a toolbox, right? Like It depends on the context. It depends on the person. And I know some people that are very sort of matter of fact. It's like, you want more clarity in defining what that means. And sometimes some people can feel like those terms are vague. Other people are like, oh, I love the flexibility of those terms, So it's a little bit like that. And I guess the other thing too is there's a balance of our nervous system that's trying to fit into society and survive. So obviously it would be ideal that we were all raised with these perfect parents that allowed us to express our emotion in every moment. But try expressing your moment at 2 p.m. after a pasta-filled lunch in a corporate business meeting, because there is an aspect about this, putting down. I know now we use food, but like pausing and releasing later that is actually necessary for social function. So it's also, we also don't want to create the next generation of spoiled brats that just scream every time they kick their toe,
right.
Irrelevant of the context that they're in, right? So and that's a really sort of developed skill, is to be like, I'm having a reaction and an experience right now, and I'm going to hit pause on it, and I'm going to create space at the end of the day, at the end of the week, whatever your life looks like, in order to let that out. And that's kind of like almost the end of the road for like, you've got your shit together if you can do that,
Yeah.
And so, because I guess, we're in this space where it's, a lot of people have been through my program and probably yours too, and said, this has literally changed the way that I'm going to parent. And I think that, there's a balance there between being able to say, and we're in this era as well, we've got these like personal development junkies that just go through heaps of courses and books and seminars and don't actually change themselves. They just sit in their wounding and they sit in their trauma, and they're like, I'm like this because I was abused or because I had a bad partner, and that's their life story. And I think anyone on a personal development journey, you got to be careful not to get stuck there, because that's full of meaning. You get lots of meaning out of sympathy and love and connection, and all those dopamine hits you're sourcing from people sympathizing with you and empathizing with you and showing you that they pity you and stuff. So
this is playing the victim, right?
Totally. But I guess it's back to that. We haven't dealt with the cause. You're just getting your dopamine hits from another source that's also not really helping the journey along.
Yeah, but it's just more socially acceptable. I'm doing look at me, I'm doing all these courses, right? I'm working on myself.
Totally. Which is, and that's not to judge anybody that's on the journey and maybe feeling stuck, or maybe being like, none of this is working. Like, it's amazing. Keep going, keep attending, but keep being a part of it. But just have some self-awareness that if you're not progressing, you might need a new toolbox.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned about the like pausing. What I call that is like compartmentalizing, right?
Yeah.
And that's so important. I've done that a couple of times myself over the last few months, and I'm like, oh, look at me go. And it is a skill, right?
Up.
Look at me, I'm doing it. But it does take a lot of practice and time.
Oh yeah.
Because you're so right. I'm so glad you brought that up. I am by no means seeing like, just go around and like throw your emotions out all day long, right? That's not how it works, right? You're going to want to save that stuff for when you're in a safe space. I think when it comes to like releasing emotions, you have to be in a safe space. So your office is probably not that, but your car is a great safe space, or, your home, if you can create some like alone time. I have a sauna. That's like my emotional like place to go. I'll go in there and I'll chant and I'll like just let it out, whatever needs to come out. So like find your safe space, right? That's really, really important. And being able to compartmentalize also on that too, like something that I've been playing around with is, and this sounds super bonkers when I say this to my clients, but like is like conscious numbing out. I call it like conscious avoidance. There's like conscious, not saying emotional eat, but like I'll use Netflix for this. So as Matty knows intimately, like I'm dealing with some father stuff, some father wounds, and I'm like working through a lot of big emotions and childhood stuff. And like in that process, I've really acknowledged like sometimes when you're working through something big, it can become all consuming, and you can just be like depressed all the time for weeks and like heavy and sad or whatever's coming up. So I believe that it's actually more loving and supportive for yourself in those times when you're actually working through some big stuff, to give yourself a mental, emotional pause. So this is where like I gift myself the time. Like I did some big crying and work and releasing for like a good 2 hours. And then I was like, fuck it, I need to watch some Netflix. And I took a break, watched some Netflix. I gave myself a little pause and then shut it off, and then went for a walk and continued like helping myself process. So it was like, sometimes we just need that like, it's okay if you do that consciously. Most people aren't at that stage. So I probably shouldn't have even mentioned that. Like that's when you're there and right? Like this is all about committing and knowing that you're going to come back to it, that, hey, I'm not done with this thing yet, but I'm going to take a bit of a pause and like distract myself in some healthy way. That's, maybe not overeating, right?
Yeah.
And then come back to it, but come back to it. That's the important part. This isn't about like ignoring it or leaving it for a year. Like this is like, I need to come back and continue processing through this stuff. So, that's kind of something that I throw in there too. Like, what? I can numb out? I thought I wasn't supposed to numb out, but I think there's a way to do it like intentionally and in a way that's actually for self-love, right? And a mental break.
Yeah. I think it's actually, it's not a tool that people should necessarily use all the time. But as you get like along that journey, you should be able to decide when it's an appropriate tool to use. Like my partner has just said something that's really offended me, but the kids are here, right?
Right.
And so it's a really good tool to be like, okay, we've got to make time for that later, but there's a situation going on right now that's of more importance that can't be witness or victim to whatever wants to come out of me right now. Yeah. So I think, it's a really good tool for self-management and practicing that, like what is going to come out of me right now is not going to represent me. And so that's another reason it's really good too, because I find that myself is that I need, if I was in a really difficult conversation where I was getting angry, and it takes a lot to get me angry, but if I'm getting there,
I could do it.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted.
But for me, like I need to be like, this needs to stop. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to take 5 minutes, because what's about to come out doesn't actually represent how I feel. Like, and it doesn't actually it represents a part of my ego that wants to hurt back, and wants to defend and wants to protect. And that's not all of me, right? All of me considers all of those thoughts and then comes up with a conclusion of like, this represents all of us, all the people in my head, I mean, because I'm clinically insane. But do you know what I mean? So a lot of the times that initial numbing out might be a good tool to be like, I'm going to numb out right now with Spotify and a podcast, listening to us, or, whatever it might be, because I need to calm down before I think rationally about responding to this trigger. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that. Now we're kind of talking about like conscious communication in a way, right? Like, but because now we're totally going to get off on a tangent, because this is totally what people do is, and I used to do this. This has been a big piece of my work over the last 5 years, is like responding in the moment to a trigger, right? When you're emotionally charged, you are never going to be a good communicator. Worst communication ever. Never, ever, ever. But this is how I was raised. This is how like my family still communicates. It's actually a big, like difficult thing with my brother, because he just says it how it is. And I'm like, whoa, like one of the practices that I've really been working through is like actually consciously taking a pause. Because I know when I reply to anything in an emotionally triggered state, which is only because they've stepped on a wound of mine, right? This is where we take personal responsibility for our own emotions. By the way, nobody made you feel anything. You're feeling something because of a past trauma or your own shit. Okay. So dealing with that is really important in any like deep relationship. Like any relationship, you want to step back, like be aware enough to know like, whoa, I'm triggered. I need some time alone. I'm going to go and like support myself with this, and maybe journal about like, what the heck was so triggering about that? Like, what did that bring up for me? I mean, that's what I do now in my relationship. Like, we're very aware, like when one of us is triggered, that's our own shit, and we need to go and like work it out. And then we can come together and debrief. Like, okay, what happened there? Like, this actually happened. It was yesterday, the day before, something came up between Ben and I, and it was like, oh, let's unpack that later. Go write that down. Let's unpack it later. Like, you go figure that out and we'll talk about it later. Cause we see this as such a different way of communicating and being, when we can own our own emotional responses and use that as a tool to be curious about our own healing and why that triggered us. And best tool ever in those situations is to give yourself space, like you just said. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, take 24 hours. You do not have to respond to a phone call or a text message or an email immediately. People don't know this. People like need permission for this. Like, I feel like we need to give people permission for this. You don't have to respond right away. Now we're going to talk about healthy boundaries, but that's another podcast. Like,
well, I was just about to mention boundaries, because even though it might sound like we're on a tangent about relationship communication, how you do anything is how you do everything. And
totally.
This comes back to conscious communication with your inner self, with those other voices in your head that you're pushing down with cookies, with donuts, with that type of thing. And that initial reaction for most people that we're talking about in this conversation is walk to the pantry, walk to the fridge, walk to the cafe. And which if you translated that into an argument with a partner would be saying the stuff you don't mean, right? So it's like going and punishing yourself with food only to later regret it, because just like you would if you threw a plate at your partner in the kitchen and then come back. And you come back 2 hours later and you're like, why did I do that? I didn't want to do that, right? So it's the same thing. Self-literacy and the way you communicate with self, it rolls out to the world around you, the people around you. So it's all relevant.
Yeah. I believe this is coming to me now, but I truly believe that like any decision or comment you make in a triggered state is going to be more harmful for you, right? Like this is the worst thing to do. This is like any thought or decision that comes up when you know you're emotionally triggered, or anything you want to say to someone or even yourself, like stop it, because it's going to be like the opposite of what you actually want to do or say, right? Like it's just the ego rearing up, trying to like just protect yourself, right? It's a protection mechanism or safety mechanism, like defend yourself or be heard and seen, like all these patterns that we all are working on, right? Like, so that pause is so powerful. Like the power of just taking a step back is pretty grown up. It's pretty adult.
Super grown up.
Super grown up. Your little child self would be super proud.
I'm glad. Likewise.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so you were asking me a question before we started chatting, Matty, about like, and I thought it was really good. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the difference between emotional eating and sugar addiction. A lot of people are like, what? How are they the same? And obviously, both of us work with that in our courses, right? We help people get off the junk and get off the emotional eating roller coaster. So like, are they the same? Are they different? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Whenever I get this question, and I had it, I think yesterday on a podcast too, I think about Bitten Johnson answering that question when I asked her. And she's basically the world's leading development person of the addiction protocols around sugar. And she said, the therapists are going to see it as emotional eating. The addiction experts are going to see it as addiction. So they're all looking at the same problem. But I think if we were to pathologize it a little bit for comprehension's sake, it would be everyone that describes himself as a sweet tooth is probably addicted to sugar, probably emotionally eating. Both things are simultaneously happening at the same time. The odd person in the group that's like, yeah, can not touch sugar. Like I can not eat chocolate for a month and it doesn't mean anything. I can have one square of a block of chocolate and leave it in the cupboard for a month. Like that's the one person in the group, and they're usually a very small minority that is not addicted to sugar. Doesn't mean they're not emotionally eating though. However, I would say addicts are definitely emotionally eating, right? So, but in the other direction, it's different. So yeah, I would say there's not much difference unless we're looking at that tiny group of people that can just go without sugar. They're just the only few that are not addicted.
Those people that everybody hate, right? Like, how are you doing that?
It must be the spawn of the devil.
They must be from another planet. Who are you? How do we get your DNA? Yeah, Matty.
But they could just be compensating though. They could still be emotionally eating with all sorts of other food. They could still have obsessive thoughts, and maybe they're that person because they're orthorexic. They're hyper obsessed with body image and got body image issues, and disordered eating is still a thing. So there's just a tremendous amount of crossover.
Yeah. Or they're saying, I get this a lot, like, I don't eat sugar. I could take it or leave it, but man, give me a bag of chips and I'm in it. And I'm like, that's the same. Like, let's be clear. That's the same thing.
Potatoes are carbohydrates. Yes.
Yeah, that's the same thing, everybody. Just sorry to burst anybody's bubble out there who's like, I'm healthy. Are you popcorn and chips?
The other thing in 2022 is that once upon a time, the question sweet or savory was a legitimate question.
Yes.
Now it's not. Sugar is in abundance in everything. And now it's like, are you sugar or sugar and salt?
Yeah. Hey, what's the craziest thing you've ever found sugar in?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, added sugar. Craziest thing I've ever seen added sugar in. Oh, I
feel like I saw one the other day and I can't remember it.
Yeah, I mean, everything. Literally. Potato chips have sugar additives. Like
yeah. I remember, like, I don't know, but this boggled my mind. Like pre-packaged herbal tea, like Tetley tea or whatever.
Yes.
I remember being, what? They're adding sugar into the, like, I don't even get to add my own sugar to the tea now. It's like already built in.
And a lot of them disguise it when it comes to the tea world as honey.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And people are like, honey's natural. Honey and tea go together.
It's organic honey.
Yeah, still sugar.
Organic vegan honey. Put that one on.
I was gonna say, what about you? Addiction versus emotional eating.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because like when I first think about it, like it to me it feels different. Like to me, sugar addiction is a physical situation. Is like a physical. Obviously, there's a cellular reaction going on from the gut into like, the blood sugar spike, dopamine hits, like the whole flood of like addictive dopamine that hits when you physically eat. So that's like the physical piece to me. It's like the very physical addiction, which is very real, very real. And to me, like the emotional eating piece is not physical. Like you feel emotions obviously in the body, but the reason you're like emotional eating is because of the thought pattern, right? Of the like thought emotion of like, I need to get out of this discomfort in my body. So it's more like the mental emotional piece that's driving you to eat sugar, as opposed to like your gut bacteria going, feed me sugar. So that, like, to me, that's like the addiction piece, like the dopamine and the like, the brain hijacking that takes place when we're over consuming sugar. Yeah. And the emotional, and then, of course, like you can be emotional eating on anything, right? Like when I find myself, actually last night, you'll laugh at this. Last night I was doing an 18-hour fast and I think I ate at like 3:30, or I like to do it in the evening, like skip dinner. And I made a food because I had to do some meal prep later. I wasn't eating any of it, but often that's hard for me, like to meal plan. And I just don't even think about it. And I'll like just take a taste of something or whatever. I'm like, crap, I was fasting. But I did. I just like, there was cantaloupe cut up in the fridge because Ben was taking it today with him. And I just like grabbed 2 squares and I was like, oh crap. Like I wasn't hungry. I didn't need to eat. I was like, I just saw it and it looked good. And I had 2 pieces. I just didn't even think of it. I was like, oh man, I caught myself. And then the old me would have been like, well, all bets are off. I'm going to like just make dinner and eat popcorn and forget it. I'm not fasting. But I put it back in the fridge and I caught myself and I was like, oh boy, like that just happens so easily, right? Like the subconscious eating when we see it, right? Or when we snack, like think of that, right? When things are out on the counter, this is a great hack. Anybody who like leaves food on the counter, stop doing that. You're going to see it and you're going to want to eat it, right? Like you're going to be picking at like the snack bowl, or obviously if you have kids that might, I don't know. I don't work a lot with moms, but that might be a bit different. Like maybe it's nice to always have healthy snacks around, or train your kids to eat at regular meal times. I don't know. I'm not a parent expert. Yeah. But that's a like, that was just a funny situation that happened yesterday. It's just such a reminder of how that can like easily creep up. But that's like, I obviously wasn't hungry, but there was this thought pattern of like, I also don't think I was in an emotional state either. It was just like a habitual, like, that's the brain, right? The brain going back to the fastest, most automated way to spend less calories on a decision. For sure. But don't even think about it. But the win there is for everybody listening. It's not to be perfect on the other end. And this is what I often say. So after my main program, I have a thing called the Consistency Club. And it's not, the idea of that is actually not built on the consistency of healthy choices per se. It's consistently getting back up. And so what you did there is the win, which is it came into my awareness and I altered my behavior. And that's the win. Consistently finding yourself in a situation. It might be before the food. It might be during the food. It might be after the food. The alarm bell will go off at some point, and the more experienced you get, the sooner in the process it will go off. And it's responding to that with a different response than you've done in the past. And that's really what you're trying to achieve. And I'm talking, I know you know this, but like just highlighting to people that the goal of emotional eating work is not to necessarily be, the perfect Instagrammer that lives a salad full life kind of thing. It's just being able to navigate emotions, because even that Instagrammer has emotional stuff come up, and has situations like you had. And the same for me. I've had that before too, where it's like, oh, I was just totally on autopilot, just not present at all. And now I've got food in my hand. And then it's, the same process of being like, all right, Matty, you literally teach this stuff. Come on. What am I doing? Come on. Put it back down. I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that's really true. Like I am far from perfect. Like I've done so much work with this, but it is like, for me, that is the definition of the success, is not exactly that, like not being perfect all the time, because that's never going to happen. And it's just going to cause more anxiety and stress, but how quickly I get back up. This is in all areas of my life. Like, something goes wrong somewhere or have an argument or something, like I don't act in the way that I normally would like to, or my higher self. And, like how quickly do I rectify? How quickly do I apologize, or to myself or someone else, or, get back on track? Like I know so many people, right, say go away from vacation. And this happens to me. This actually was a couple of weeks ago. I didn't eat my best on vacation. I went camping. Like camping is like, come on. There's snacks. There's snacks camping.
Beers.
Okay. No beers. I'm not a beer drinker.
I would have been all over the beers.
You would have been in the cooler of beers. Okay. We're going to need a second cooler for you. But yeah, like, coming home from that being like, okay, back to normal, as opposed to like, well, forget it. I'm just going to keep binging what's the point? I'm just going to, I'll start fresh on July 1st. And like, that was my old mentality. And I know so many people, like, you have one bad day or one bad night where you're like, oh, I binged on cookies last night or something. Like, can you just get back up and be and gentle and kind and loving with yourself? And like, I always like get my clients to just start getting super curious, because those moments when we cave or when we binge or we have an unhealthy moment, it is such a beautiful and gift opportunity to learn something. Right. Yes. Learning something like, oh, I didn't realize that loneliness was a big trigger for me. Or, oh yeah, I did talk to my mom on the phone last night and it threw me over the edge. Okay. There's some things there that I need to look at. So these symptoms, like you said, right, these are all symptoms, that the binge eating, the emotional eating. So when we can start to become addicted to looking inward and being curious about like, what's really going on, like you said, the 5 whys, or like why times 5, and, totally. Getting curious about like, what's under the surface here and what's really going on.
Yeah. And the second part of that, I think, would be ensuring like it's kind of nice to have a list of options in your head that you could do instead. But if sugar is still the lowest barrier to entry solution when you're triggered, tired, and stressed, it'll be one of those things where you're like, I just keep doing it. So you've got to actively set up, whilst you're not triggered, all of the helpful tools and your environment. So knowing that at some point today or tomorrow or this week, you're going to feel like that again, because you're a human and that's okay. But you've got to set that environment up when you don't feel like that, so that when you're there, it's like, oh, I can see a few other options in front of me, instead of being like, this is the time that I'm meant to do all of the really hard work and I can't be bothered and the sugar's just there, so I'm going to do that again, right? And it's like when you learn how to argue with a partner. The worst time to do it is when you're triggered. Like, you don't start using new tools when you need them to work, right?
Or when you're tired.
Yes. Or when you're trying to sleep.
Yeah. We've had some good ones at night. And I'm like, why are we arguing? Like, just go to sleep. We'll talk about it tomorrow.
So yeah, I think, just making sure that when we're not triggered, we can set those things up. Like, and the loneliness, for a good example, is like, making sure that you set up a hobby or set up a regular thing that you go and do. The trigger might not even happen if you start regularly seeing people, right? It's like, because you're getting that need met throughout the week, or, whatever it might be. You got to set that environment up so that and you're talking about mums and food on the bench. One thing I get people to do is move all of the unhelpful food, and we call it mood food. So it takes that kind of binary good, bad label off it, to a cupboard that they virtually never go into, or that's not a part of their routine. Or it might be in another room. It might be somewhere else. So that's like out of sight, out of mind. And I think kids, it has to be the same. Shouldn't be food on the bench. There shouldn't be even healthy food on the bench. It should be eating when my body requires nutrition, and the food lives in the fridge or the pantry or, cupboard, whatever. Because if it's there, we can still emotionally eat apples. They're hybridized, they're unnaturally sweet, they're plenty of sugar. So it's, you can still trick yourself into thinking you're making a good decision and then eat 7 apples in a day.
Yeah. I feel like Ben could do that. He's the apple man. I rarely eat apples. As soon as I stopped eating like oatmeal for breakfast, back when I thought it was like really healthy to do that, I don't eat fruit anymore. Like I do. I'll definitely have a fruit snack, not a fruit snack, fruit as a snack. Let's be clear. I used to live on fruit snacks. I don't know if that's what you call them in Australia. Yeah, no,
we've got those.
Yeah. Once in a while I'll have it, but it's amazing how that just shifts. I'm like, oh, I don't remember the last time I've eaten a fruit. But
I was going to ask as well, do you see a lot of people that also kind of have this secret alcohol problem as well? So in my experience, I have a lot of people come in, and it takes a while of getting them to know them before we really uncover, okay, I can't let go of wine every single night. And there's a lot of shame and embarrassment around that. But I would say it's like 7 to 8 out of 10 of the people that have been through my program, that's a part of their thing, but it just took them a while to get honest with it. So do you see a lot of that as well?
Yes and no. I mean, that's probably because I haven't we don't really go into that in the program as much, right? We're just focusing more on, what's going on underneath versus what are we actually using to cope, So, we assume it's sugar in all of its forms, right? Whether that's alcohol or not. But that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I have seen it. I have definitely seen some of it. And I would not be surprised if that was true, if it was 7 or 8 out of 10, because there's, but when we start understanding that alcohol is sugar, then I'm just kind of lumping that in the same, are you using sugar in whatever form it is, right? If it's a piece of bread or candy or wine, being really intentional with how we're using that. And I'm saying this as a wine lover. I love wine. Don't get me wrong. I love wine.
Same.
And I've been in and out with my struggles with that too. It's so ingrained in me as a self-care tool or celebration, treat yourself. Yeah. So that's definitely something I'm still working through, and I'm not perfect at. And, I think those definitely go hand in hand. I have a friend, another Australian, I don't know if you've ever met Sarah Rusbatch. She's over in Perth.
I've never met her, but we've been on the emails. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. You'd love her. She's been sober forever. And she really a lot of what we're talking about. I've had a lot of really great, emotional drinking conversations with her. Cause it's very parallel, right? With how we use alcohol and how socially acceptable it is and how, pushed we are into using it for everything and all those things. So, you'll love connecting with her. And anybody who's curious about, maybe noticing some of those alcohol dependencies, or she talks about a gray area drinking, right? There's this whole new thing I never heard about before. It's have you heard of gray area drinking? Obviously.
No.
Okay. So really interesting. Cause I started hearing about it, from a family member not long ago. Was reading a book about it cause she was struggling with alcohol and I was like, what the heck is this? So, and I'm seeing more and more gray area coaches popping up. And essentially it's this understanding that a lot of people are not alcoholics, but we're still maybe in the gray area below that where we're we're not drinking all day long, but maybe you're not making it through the evening without a couple glasses of wine, right? Or you just feel that need for it. You're not an alcoholic, but you're still, drinking in a dependent kind of way. And it's kind of this gray area drinking, it's called. So super fascinating. Anyone who's curious about that, go check out Sarah.
That's probably what the women that I work with would definitely fall into. Definitely don't consider themselves alcoholics. Don't get drunk. It's one glass
alcohol. When you think of alcohol, you're hardcore. It's I get up in the morning, I'm drinking all day, I'm showing up to work drunk, all that, right? And there's no shame in that. I have one of my best friends is a recovered alcoholic, and I'm so fascinated by her story. I'm always asking her questions of how, all the things that she's been through, and she's lived a wild life. But it's a journey for all of us. And
totally.
There's so much shame. I know I've dealt with that in the past, really in my food stuff, with wine, with emotions, with my sexuality. I'm actually working through some layers of shame around that right now, which is there's just, and I think people when we start talking about addictions in general, and we're kind of not talking about emotional eating anymore, but I guess it is, because shame could be, is labeled as an emotion, right? And I think that is for most, according to Gabor Mate, I'm a huge fan of his and the work that he does in the addiction space. He is really hitting home, right? The root of all addiction is trauma and essentially shame that comes from that, is right. And how we didn't get what we needed. And now, we're either ashamed of who we are, or there's a big difference between being ashamed of who we are as a human and something we did. Right.
Yeah.
So it's the who we are as a human. I'm ashamed of myself and I don't love myself and I hate myself. That's gonna drive us 10 out of 10 times into some sort of addictive behavior, whether it's masturbation or sugar or shopping or whatever.
Xbox gaming,
Xbox
porn.
Gaming. Yeah. Right. That's probably a whole deep dive for another day for sure. So we've talked a little bit, and I want to make sure that we both hit on this, because this is we've had such a good chat back and forth, but how do people navigate out? I know you've shared some super awesome tools that I'm like, I'm going to use, but for myself, no plagiarism for myself. But no, there's no competition here. I love you.
We've
So
had
like,
that
how
D&M.
do we, yeah, how do we start? Yeah. How do we actually, how do you support your clients in like, shifting this pattern and getting out of the habit of emotional eating?
Yeah. So in the beginning, like, it's that reflection on what the patterns that currently exist and figuring out why they exist and understanding yourself more. And then it's about building out a toolbox of alternative ways to manage your emotion, process emotion, become emotionally literate. And then every time that situation arises, we get more and more familiar with it. It's more and more in our awareness, and we literally just start using alternative tools. So in the beginning, obviously, like I said, many situations we're unable to express the problem or the issue or our rage at the time, and so we still need to go through that cycle, like we said, of like, instead of the sugar, it might be a hug, or instead of the coffee and a muffin down at the cafe, it might be a walk around the block and a phone call to someone, an alternative way to manage that until we can actually get to dealing with it. So yeah, the main thing is building out that toolbox, and that toolbox also involves scripts to communicate to your social network, your partner, and how to phrase these things, and literally practicing those scripts in the mirror. Because a lot of people, get to those situations on Friday night or at dinner time or whatever, and they kind of like, oh, well, I'm just, I'm just, I just want to kind of do it, and nothing really comes out.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's husbands, particularly. I've worked with a lot of women whose husbands are not on board, and they're annoyed that they've spent money on yet another diet program that's not going to work, and some husbands that are just actively sabotaging. Look, probably some couples counseling and divorce is necessary in some cases, but in most cases, it's just back to that communication piece, which is and I really think communicating in regards to your wellness and coming from a place of truth, not just like, oh yeah, just giving this one a go, being like, I'm really, really sick of feeling awful in my body. Like, I don't know if you know, but like when I eat these foods, I actually go through a lot of pain, whatever it is for you, and communicate it in regards to your wellness. And I'm really just trying to make my life better. And I want my kids to grow up healthy, and having like, it's like 2 minutes of really meaningful explanation for the people that you don't have to explain yourself to anyone, but the reality is we are social creatures, and we kind of do. We've got to explain what's going on for us to be able to get the world around us to move in the right way. And almost everybody should respond with, fair enough, okay, cool, you do you. Anyone that doesn't do that, off the Christmas card list, gone.
Yeah,
they're
especially
shit
if it's your husband. No card for
yes.
you.
Like, literally, if you talk about your wellness and in an honest way, and somebody is like, idiot, or like, whatever, it's just like, piss off, go away, I don't need this in my space.
Really starts to show you like who's there to show up for you, right? Like, who are your real friends? I think for me, definitely, I think we've talked about this outside, right, of this, but like this last 2 years has really taught me some of the people in my life that don't really need to be in my life. Don't really respect me and like honor my choices for me. Right. Mm-hmm. So like, it's a tricky one, right? When those are like maybe close people to you. I had a client who like had to do that with her sister, and another one with her best friend, right? It's like people that you just notice just can't support you where you need them to support you, and don't respect your choices, right? To do another program, or because of their own shit, right? They've got their own ego going on, trying to like keep you where you are. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but it is really telling, and a really great opportunity for you to start noticing who's really there to show up for you, and who's trying to keep you unhealthy. Unconsciously, usually subconsciously. I was joking with Ben yesterday. I was going to make a meme. I've reached a new state of consciousness, unconsciousness. I was going to do a meme because I was like pretty sure I wanted to pass out in the sauna last night. I was in there way too long and did not have enough electrolytes. I was like, I need more water. Right. I was like, I'm going to reach unconsciousness. Anyway. It's the new rage, everybody. Unconsciousness.
It sounds enlightening.
Where all the like 60 human beings are hanging out.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, what do you think? What do you think for walking out? Or the other thing I would say before I pass it back over to you, but it's just that it's a journey. It takes time. I'm really big on my mantra, 1 tweak a week. Like this stuff, it's essentially an identity transformation, which in some regards involves stepping into a new version of yourself and possibly grieving an old version of yourself or going through some kind of ego death,
Yeah.
and that stuff doesn't happen overnight. It happens one small step at a time, one sugary situation at a time, one evening of wine at a time, and just understand that this is a journey. We got here, usually everyone I talk to, after 30 or 40 years of going one way. And now we're just like a couple of weeks into going a new way. So it's going to take time, and give yourself grace and space and acceptance in order for it to be a journey that takes as long as it needs to take.
Yeah. And this is where like you and I are just so radically different than the masses, right? Because like we're here. I mean, I know that I can say we, because I know you really well, right? We're here to like really try to wake people up to this truth that there's no quick fix, right? Like, and we get so addicted to the quick fix, right? Like, oh, I'll help you, lose 100 pounds in 10 weeks. And like, nobody can guarantee that. Right. And this, when we start really getting into creating new neural pathways that have been there for 50 or 60 years, like it's going to take some time. And before you know it, one day you'll recognize, I remember like, in my mind, like some of these moments where I like dealt with an emotion in a healthy way. And I remember being like, oh, I'm doing it. Like all of a sudden, like you said, it becomes who you are, right? Like you start literally operating in a different way, in a different, vibration and frequency. And like, you'll just start noticing one day that you're like, I would have usually just eaten myself into oblivion after a difficult argument with my mom. And look at me. I'm not. I'm actually out for a walk, or I'm like, having a bath or whatever it is, or having a dancing it out or something. Right. So it'll just happen one day. And it's really beautiful if you stay the course. And this is where like, Matty and I will both agree, like, it's so important to have community and the right guidance and the right, like, I'm 6 years into this emotional journey and I still catch myself. Like there's still work to be done. So there's new emotions and traumas that come up all the time because I'm looking for them. It doesn't help.
Totally. Well, and even though those little wins, they feel little, like you should really celebrate them in a big way, because in order to create this new identity, your old identity didn't celebrate wins. You just focused on the negative things, most likely.
Totally.
And right. And so literally in the beginning, when you do the thing and you're like, oh my God, I just went to the supermarket and didn't buy anything and I'm not eating on the way home. You literally should just be like, yes, oh my God, this is amazing. So you feel literally when you're happy and proud, you get the goosebumps and the tingle down your spine. You want to confirm to your nervous system that a really good thing has just happened. So that's like the actual physical, neurological thing that needs to happen to confirm. It's kind of like that bridge between, the emotions and the personality and like the actual hardware of your body. You need to tell the hardware that something good has happened so that your emotions can be like, oh, this is a safe space, right? This is a good place to hang out. So I think it's, really celebrating the wins. And I had somebody jump on a consistency call last week and she was like, I literally just get on here because we talk about our wins and I don't do that anywhere else in my life.
Yeah. And how quickly are we to also downplay our wins? We're like, no, I have a lot of my clients that are like, nah, it wasn't that big of a deal. Right. Like, or I cried last week for the first time in 10 years, but it was like nothing else really happened. And I'm like, excuse me, you did what? Like,
let's come back to
huge. Let's just like rewind for a second. Cause what just happened? You like actually felt an emotion for the first time in 10 years. Like, why are we not jumping with joy and celebrating that? Like, that's such a huge piece as well that we need to remember. We start every week, every call in my program with that, like, what's your win? Like, it sounds like you do that too. Like we're starting with a win because it's so our old selves, right? The tendency is to go right into complaining or right into like, I'm struggling, right? And we'll never feel like we're making progress because we're like there's always going to be a new level, a new thing to work towards. We're never there, by the way, in case anybody didn't know that secret. We're never there. There's no final destination, even death, depending on what you believe. But, like, remembering to celebrate actually helps you recognize that you're making progress, right? And then you're like, oh, I am changing, or these things are working. I am improving. Oh, I am getting healthier, right? If we don't, we're just always going to be, the goalpost is always being moved, right? You lose that 5 pounds. Well, now I need to lose another 5. Like, it's never, how often do we just sit in that, like, I did it, I made it, right? It's always like, what's next? So like, we need to honor that too. And we're amazing. And we need to remember that.
100%. Just like we talked about creating space to let the pain and the uncomfortable and heavy emotions exist, we also need to create space to celebrate wins and positivity and acknowledgement, because they're both equally important and worthy of acknowledgement.
Yeah. 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 In a big way.
Yeah.
So coming back, I'll share my 2 bits on that. Obviously there's so many nuances, and I know it's so hard even for you, right, to have this conversation, but kind of when it comes to like, how do we step out of emotional eating? It sounds like we have a lot of similarity in this, but maybe slight differences as well. So I kind of approach it from 2 areas, 2 steps, you can call it. And I will actually call them steps. The first one is to learn to make friends with your feelings. So actually feeling. And the second one is processing emotions. So similar to what you're doing, the step 1, and I have to hit this home a million times because it's so easy for us to want to get into this processing emotions, because that's doing something. I know how to do things. I want to do something different. I want to do a new habit. I want to go for a walk, or like do something about this emotion to make it go away. So I believe that is like, that needs to wait. And we really need to spend a lot of time in the first stage to make friends with these emotions. So we know that it's safe to feel stressed, or it's safe to feel anxiety. It's safe to feel grief. It's safe to feel sadness. So we have to first start like creating space in our day to tune in, because you're right. Yeah. Like we spend, and this was me, I was busy all the time. I used to joke that it was genetically handed down from my dad, because he's always puttering, always doing something. Like maybe there's some of that there, but it's definitely been patterned for me to like be busy all the time, look busy, stay active, to avoid my emotions, right? This is another way that we avoid our emotions. So when you actually create space to slow down, you can actually hear your intuition. You feel your emotions. So this is why so many people are agitated in loneliness, because they're like, oh my God, I have nothing to do. Or boredom. That was my biggest trigger, because I'm like, I'm bored. Oh my God, that means I'm going to have to like feel something and like hear myself. And that's a scary, unknown place to be. So we need to start making friends with that space. So that's why I call it making friends with your feelings, and actually booking in time, even if it's like 5 minutes a day, right? To just sit. It doesn't have, not a meditation. It can be like sit outside with a cup of tea and look at the trees, or, go barefoot in the grass, and, whatever that like moment of peace and tranquility can be for you. Maybe it's in the bathroom, because that's the only place you get privacy from your kids, or wherever it is, to just tune in and just check in with yourself. And as you progress through that, the goal is then to start practicing when an emotion comes up, to pause with it, to hang out with it for a couple minutes, take some deep breaths. Don't try to make it go away, because this will be your immediate response will be, okay, I'm feeling stressed. And your mind will be like, how do I get out of it? How do I get out of it? Get me out of here. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. So it's about like just literally practicing day by day. I'm going to be with my stress. Like, well, what does it feel in my body? Right? Why am I stressed? Maybe if you want to, right? And just like getting curious about stress, right? Or anxiety, or whatever's coming up. So there's a whole lot of work to be done there, like learning to slow down, learning to take that time to tune in, learning how to repattern these safety mechanisms and rewire our belief systems about emotions. Yeah. All that sort of stuff is kind of in that stage 1. And then only then, once you feel like, okay, I'm making some progress, like when I feel emotional, I don't feel that escape mechanism showing up as much, then we can absolutely start building in some processing techniques. So this is like the tools that sounds like very similar to you, right? Where we can start to build new patterns and habits for, okay, when these things come up, how can I support my body? So very big difference here that I want to highlight, that I really preach, is that there's a very big difference between processing an emotion and using some sort of healthy other habit to also numb out, right? To escape the emotion. So we're not escaping, and it's a fine line, right? There's like going for a beautiful nature walk while listening to a podcast, I would argue, is escaping, because you're not with yourself. You're not in your body. You're not in your emotion. You're thinking about something else. You're distracting yourself. So think as you're processing, are you distracting, or are you being present in your body and with yourself? So there's so many ways, right? And each emotion is going to be different, in how you want to process that. I'm a huge proponent of dance. We start all of our group calls with dance. I always put on a dance party. We get in our bodies, we shake out whatever needs to be shaked out anyway, for the day. that's my feminine side as well. That's my main go-to tool. Using your voice is really powerful. I mean, there's so many things you can do, obviously connecting with nature, having a hug, all these things. And you have to start playing around. I always encourage my clients to start a list of knowing your top trigger emotions. We all have some really major trigger ones. Like mine was always boredom. Most people it's like stress or, loneliness or these sorts of things. So get clear on your main trigger ones and start there.
Yeah.
And then start getting curious about making a list of next time I'm stressed, what do I think could support me with that instead? Right. And make a list. I actually have a whole PDF document in my program that's 100 ideas of processing emotions. Pick and choose what works for you. So there's so many ways to do it and there's no one right way, but it's about practicing what works for you. So for some people, anger, right? For some people, going to the gym and doing some boxing is really going to be helpful. Right. But for me, I enjoyed the rage writing, right? Or I really enjoy actually for me, anger actually processes out really well with tears as well. I love a good cry when I'm angry or to go for a run. Those sorts of things really work for me. So you have to start experimenting with what feels good to me in these emotional states and then start practicing it, right? Over time, practice, continue being with your emotion. It's not oh, I'm angry, I need to escape right away. We need to repattern that. And then we can start supporting that energy to actually move out of us. And the most frustrating part, I wonder if you've noticed this too. I know that we've both been on an emotional roller coaster for years, supporting each other with that. But, one of the things that I've always struggled with was trying to rush the emotion, right? Say I'm going through grief, when Ben's dad passed away and I was oh, I'm tired of grief. I've felt it. I've cried. Why is it still here? It's been a week. Why is it still here? Go away. So we can be doing all the right things. And sometimes I often joke, right? An emotion has its own timeline and we can't rush it. You can't be okay, I'm going to have a good cry and then it's going to be gone. Unfortunately we can't, this is where we have to trust and surrender. And sometimes those big emotions, they need some space. And sometimes the emotion might not even be current. It might be I'm feeling sad because my dog passed away yesterday, but now it's bringing up sadness from my whole childhood. And
totally.
And it's all coming out. So we have to be patient with that. I know that's something I always struggle with because I'm hurry up. I cried, it should be gone. Have you ever?
I don't want to feel this anymore.
Yeah, I'm done. This sucks.
It's funny as you were talking there too, so I've got a program running at the moment. We're in the early half. So mine, and maybe this is where our stuff is a little bit different, is that I have about half psychology. So we do the mind and then we go to the nutrition, the gut health, the body stuff. And so in the first half, because everyone's conditioned to diet culture, it's hey, Matty, what should I have for breakfast? Or what should I have here? How should I eat this? What do you think of this? And what I do every time we run this program for the first few weeks is we're doing the mind stuff. We're doing the mindset, and your ego and your brain is looking for the fastest way to do the least amount of work, which is, Matty, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this work is that we're bringing all of this out of the unconscious. We're bringing it all out of, the parts of the brain that are automated back into awareness to do the work. So if we jump to how can I automate this process as fast as possible, no progress will happen. It will just be a thing you tried one time. It'll be on the list of diets that don't work, So it's I get that with people too. It's escapism, essentially. Tell me what to eat, right?
Yeah.
It's hang on, no, we've got to do the really conscious work before we get to being conscious about the healthy food.
Yeah. I get that too. I don't think our programs are that different with that. We spend a solid 4 weeks before going off sugar. I do a detox period support in my program. So we do we get deep into what's really going on and how we want to show up and all the deep stuff before we even talk about. And I get the same thing. It's what's the meal plan and what's the all the 3D questions, right? The external environmental factors. That's the easy stuff to do. So we're going to start with the hard stuff because that's really where change comes from, right? When we start thinking and believing and feeling differently, we don't, and I'm so passionate about this. This is very much the focus of my program is learning to really be in your own power and trust your body again. Right. So then, and I'm willing to bet you notice that too, after you do the mindset stuff, people don't need to ask you a question anymore. Right. They're I know what's right for me. Or I'm going to eat what feels based off of what I know, right? From all this amazing nutritional information, I'm going to try different recipes for breakfast, or I'm going to figure out what works for me, not what's going to work for Matty. Right.
Totally.
So it's really I think we're both on that mission to help people step back into their power. We've outsourced our health for our whole lives. It's like the doctor knows what's good for me. This magazine and documentary knows how I should eat and what's going to make me feel the best. And it's such a lie. We all need different things, and we need to figure out what works for our unique selves. Same with this emotional eating process. Like it's not black and white. Nothing is. And we need to stop looking for that quick answer and learn how to tune back in and listen to our own intuition, our own body. You know, how many people go against what their body's telling them, right? Because of some sort of documentary they saw that told them they have to do X, Y, and Z. Like eat kale all day long. And you're like, oh, kale, oh, my body. But I'm going to eat kale because somebody told me to eat kale, right? Yeah. I'm growing kale right now in my garden. It's not doing well. It's not growing. I may not be eating kale.
Oh, you're funny.
Yeah.
Well, and I agree. Fundamentally, all of this stuff is learning to trust self, and self intuitively knows what's right. But we've just silenced it for so very long. And I think it's important also to, like not mix up trauma and intuition as well. Like is there's a whole other conversation, because it's good to trust your intuition, but your intuition was also cultivated in the same environment that your trauma happened, right? So you can have some gut feelings about things that are based on a traumatic past. And so, which is, the art of separating your true intuition and trauma.
Yeah. Interesting way of looking at it. I kind of disagree, but it might just be my definition of intuition. Because when I think of my intuition, and that's interesting because that is a big word that can probably have multiple meanings, right? But when I think of it, I'm thinking of that deep connection with my inner truth and my higher self, which was not created through trauma. That is like my soul, essentially my soul's voice is what is right for me at such a deep, like intuitive level, like my true higher self, which is beyond, from the moment I came onto this earth, that was there, that truth and like my inner deep knowing of like what I need to do and what I need not to do. But you're right. Like, of course, trauma can come through as like, it's going to come through in that belief system. It's going to come through in our patterns. It's going to come through in emotional responses to things. So we do definitely, not rely on those things, right? We have to be careful for sure. Like, oh, okay, this thing makes me feel angry. I shouldn't do it. Well, wait, like, is that real? Or has it been a conditioned response from a trauma situation?
Yeah, which is the art of like learning to tease them apart, and comes all the way back around to where we started about developing self-awareness and like, is this real hunger? Is this really how I feel about this,
Yeah. So is that like, I'm feeling like now might be a good time to sort of wrap things up. Like, what would you say would be some places for people to start, or some takeaways? You were just kind of starting to list that, which made me think of that question, right? Like for people now, obviously we talked about a lot, what are some pieces that people can take away and maybe start with, or, start getting in curious, and some tools, maybe. I know you shared a lot, but
DanielleDame.com.
Yes, MattyLansdown.com. Brand new website. It's beautiful. Check out Matty's new website. It is beautiful. Don't look at mine.
Thank you. Both of those are great places to start. I've got a bunch of articles on there, and you've got a heap of content as well. So that's good. Obviously, my podcast, your podcast, but tangibly in one's physical reality, in the 3D life that you are living. Making space, understanding that this takes practice. And it doesn't mean that you need to be like, all right, for 8 hours every Saturday. These are literally 2-minute things. And I think a really good space to start is just like you do with your clients, is pause before you eat. Like just for 10 seconds, like consciously make the decision to eat. Like that's a really, really good thing to start practicing. And because you're bringing consciousness into what you're doing with food, that'll start to go out into other areas, and you'll start picking up on like, oh, this is how I show up for that, or this is how I engage with that, or I didn't even realize that that's been happening for 15 years. And I think that's a really low barrier to entry place to start. And even if what you uncover, and I talk with my clients a lot about this, in that conscious moment, even if you uncover that you're not about to do something very helpful, it's not always, we shouldn't judge it. It's not always a thing that has to be interrupted. And it might be like, I'm emotionally eating right now. I'm responding to this situation. And the little win in there is the fact that you've got the awareness. And that's where we start. A lot of the times, once you've got this knowledge, you catch yourself in the middle of the shit. And you're like, damn it, I learned about this. I know this stuff. But actually what I'd love you to do is change that story and be like, it's happening right now. All right, I see what's going on now, and that real curiosity of like, I get it. So next time when it happens, I'm going to give something different a go, right? Rather, because if you start beating yourself up, the whole self-sabotage loop just continues as it always has.
Yeah.
So I think, that's a really, really easy place to start. What about you? What do you think?
So good. Ditto, everybody. Ditto.
That.
Yeah. I call that like loving curiosity. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I observed that too myself. Like I'm making a poor choice right now, but that's okay to still make that choice. Like that awareness is so, because what's not like automatically going to happen is the more you are in that moment of awareness, like, oh, I'm choosing to emotionally eat right now. Then it's a choice. And then you're going to notice like tomorrow, maybe you do it one less time than you did yesterday. Maybe you actually like make a better choice. Like, oh, I'm emotionally eating. I'm going to go for a walk instead. And you direct, right? And then the next day you end up doing it twice. And then before you know it, like that's your norm. You're doing that more than you're turning to the food. So you're like, that pause is so powerful, and over naturally that awareness of what you're doing is going to create you and cause you to make different choices in the future. Maybe not in the moment. And sometimes you may still choose, like I totally still sometimes choose to numb out on Netflix. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with this right now. I'm Netflixing. I'm like, I'm having a glass of wine and I'm Netflixing tonight, but I'll be back to this later. Right. And that's okay. If you're doing it with intention and love for yourself, I think all of this coming back to like how much of what we do is really fueling the fire of self-hatred and diet mentality and this war that we have against ourselves. And I always love like posing this to my clients in my program, like, how's that working? Like we look at the state of our world and health, like we've been like restricting and binging, or, restrict and binge and guilting ourselves and trying to do all these diets and shaming ourselves and willpowering ourselves into like being healthy for a month. And it's clearly not working. Like clearly there is a different way. Like I feel like a lot of my clients are just like done with this fight, right? It's like always fighting against your body, fighting against food. And it's like, what if we could approach this journey to health with love and acceptance and gentleness and more feminine energy? And I've seen that be such a more supportive way to live, because ultimately we know how harmful stress is for the body as well. I would say it's probably better to eat a brownie a day than to like not sleep and be stressed all the time, right? Like those things are super toxic. Eat the brownie, sleep really well, and don't stress about it. You're going to like, look at Italy, right? They drink wine and eat pasta all day and they're so relaxed because they don't like stress themselves out. And they take 3 hours off in the afternoon. I think we should start that here as well.
Yes, siestas, bring them back.
Yes, siesta. Anyway, there's so many other factors to this, right? And it's not all about like never eating junk food. I definitely eat junk food, and it's really that relation to it and how you're approaching it that helps it assimilate, helps it get flushed out, helps it actually be dealt with in the body instead of like being this extra stress response, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So amazing. That's, I pretty much just ditto what you said. And be curious, right? And start writing this down, like even start connecting with like, sitting with yourself and checking in with what do I feel in my body, right? If you can't label emotions yet, like really starting at ground zero with that, keep a journal, like just get curious. And then, hang out more with Matty and I, and we've definitely got lots of resources to help you kind of take those next steps. And
totally.
We're both here to support you with that. This has been so fun. Thanks. Totally. Thanks for recording this. Thanks for being willing to record. This is awesome.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been really good to just hash this conversation out. And I love that we recorded it. The first time we've had it, we recorded it. So
I was like, oh boy, I don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to argue? No.
It would have been possibly entertaining.
It would have. I was kind of hoping. I was like, I hope Matty says something that just fires me up. But
let's dig for some stuff. We might be able to put together some good episodes.
We might have to do something else. We're two on the same page with this, which obviously tells something, right? Like we're both coming at this from a different angle, but coming to very similar conclusions about like how we navigate out of this. And I think that's really powerful to see as well.
Absolutely.
We must be doing something right.
We're giving it a red hot crack.
Yeah. Well, our clients think so. I mean, all the people that been through my program, definitely are like, you're doing something right. So
Totally.
there's wisdom to this. And Matty and I have both been doing this and helping women with this for years now. So we have the proof. It's not just our own lived experience that, we've seen this work in action, and it's pretty life-changing. And fuels my soul, definitely doing this work. And having conversations with you, of course, fuel my soul too.
Likewise.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this little chitty chat. And I'll see you next week, Matty, probably.
You definitely will. I'll be there.
Yeah. All right. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.